They say life only changes in the big moments: weddings, losses, lotteries. That afternoon proved it can change in the quiet click of a door, when someone you thought you knew stands in your kitchen and says the one thing that rearranges your heart. Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, before I begin, tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. It was a Tuesday with the kind of light that makes dust look like glitter in the air. I had a pot of chamomile cooling on the counter, my glasses slipping down my nose as I sorted recipes I kept promising I'd finally organize. The doorbell startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, there he was. Even my friend Marlene's son, taller than I remembered, with the polite posture his mother drilled into him, and a tiredness you can't learn from anyone. "Hey, Miss Carter," he said, trying on a smile. He's 24, maybe 25 now, old enough to speak softly and still carry weight. He held a small paper bag. "Mom baked. Said you'd love the lemon bars." I waved him in, already teasing that Marlene's lemon bars were famous for disappearing before she reached the doorstep. He laughed, but the sound didn't reach his eyes. He stood at the edge of the rug like he was visiting a museum, unsure of where to step. I told him to sit. He chose the chair by the window, the one with a slanted cushion that always makes people shift around until they find a spot that suits them. We made small talk. Work. Weather. The neighborhood dog that believes it owns the sidewalk. While I sliced the lemon bars, he studied my refrigerator pictures, my grandson with chocolate on his chin, my sister beaming beside a lopsided snowman, a Polaroid of Marlene and me, younger and reckless, holding thrift store teacups like they were jewels. When I set a plate in front of him, his shoulders eased an inch. He took one careful bite, then stared at the crumbs like they could answer something I didn't yet know to ask. "You okay?" I said, pouring tea. "You've got a look." "I'm fine," he lied with all the grace of a child who has practiced it. "Actually." He stopped, the word hovering. "Could I? Do you have a minute?" I nodded and we listened to the clock tick. The room had that late afternoon hush that makes every sound feel like a choice. He wrapped his fingers around the mug but didn't drink. I recognized that grip. It's the same way I used to hold on to my steering wheel after my divorce, parked in the driveway before I found the courage to walk inside to a house that remembered us both. He said he'd only meant to drop off the lemon bars. He'd been driving past and saw my car and thought, well, why not? And then he said the most ordinary sentence in the world with a gravity that made it different. I could use some advice. He told me about a good job that didn't feel good anymore. About waking up heavy, like he'd slept with all his clothes on. About a conversation with his father that went sideways, voices raised, old resentments exposed like wires. I didn't come to talk about him, he added quickly, apologizing for bringing my history near the table. He knows my ex and I stepped carefully around each other for years. He knows some stories don't need more air. "It's okay," I said. "We can talk about anything. Or nothing. Your choice." He looked up the window at the maple tree that keeps my porch shady. A breeze lifted the leaves and sent dappled light pulsing across the floor, like the room was breathing with us. "I don't know how to say this without it coming out wrong," he said. I've been carrying something, and I didn't know who else to bring it to." There are times you can feel a moment gathering, the way a summer sky gathers thunder. I felt it then, something honest wanting a place to land. I stayed quiet, let the kettle's metal ping fill the space as it cooled. He took a breath, and instead of a confession, what came out first was a memory. He reminded me of the time, years ago, when Marlene was in the hospital overnight, and I kept him while she recovered. He was 12, long limbs and big sneakers, and we made grilled cheese and watched a nature documentary where whales sang to each other across miles of ocean. You told me, he said, smiling a little at the thought, that sometimes people talk like whales, very quietly, and if you don't sit still, you won't hear them. I had forgotten I'd said that. It sounded like something I would say, a kinder way to ask a boy to settle without crushing the fidget right out of him. He said he'd been trying to sit still lately, to listen for the quiet voices in himself. I think I heard one, he said, and it scared me. I set my tea down and folded my hands the way I do when I want someone to know I'm not going anywhere. He stared at the lemon bars again, as if they were easier to face than my eyes. He told me how success looked like a tight suit on him, polished, expensive, but not made to move. He told me how he missed the simple satisfaction of building something with his hands, the way his grandfather taught him, the smell of cut pine, the measure twice, cut once of it all. He told me about a woman he cares for in a way that doesn't fit tidy categories yet, and how that made him want to be a steadier man. And then he told me the hardest part, the fear that if he changed course, he'd disappoint everyone who had clapped for him so far. Especially my dad, he said, voice low. I nodded. Clapping can be loud enough to drown out your own heartbeat. He looked at me, surprised by the sentence. We both smiled. I felt that old protective warmth bloom in my chest, the one I used to feel when my son was small and holding a paper airplane like it could actually fly. I wanted to wrap my home around this young man the way you wrap a shawl, not to hide him, but to keep him warm while he decides. We talked about practical things, budgets, timelines, the difference between quitting and choosing. I told him what I wish someone had told me at 47, that changing your mind isn't a failure. It's a sign you're paying attention. I admitted I had stayed too long in rooms that didn't have a chair for me. He laughed at that, then went quiet again, watching the light crawl across the table. What if, he said carefully, what if the person I'm trying to be isn't the person my dad recognizes? What if he doesn't like him? Then that's your father's work, I said gently. Yours is to become. He breathed out through his nose, a soft, almost laugh that sounded like relief trying to find a path. We packed the extra lemon bars into a container, and I sent him home with an old tape measure that had belonged to my late neighbor, a man who could fix anything with patience and a good light. Evan turned the tape over in his hands like it was a coin with an answer on the other side. At the door, he hesitated. The hallway felt longer all of a sudden. There's more, he said, voice barely above the floor. I didn't say the real thing. Not yet. Then don't force it, I said. Let it arrive. He nodded, eyes shiny but steady. He thanked me in a way that wasn't about the tea or the lemon bars or the borrowed tape measure. It was the thanks people give when you've let them be unguarded without asking for anything in return. After he left, the house seemed to hum with what he hadn't said. I stood in the doorway a while, hand on the frame, watching the street where the late sun pressed everything into long shadows. The kettle pinged again, the last bit of warmth letting go. I set the recipes aside and wrote his name on a notepad with a small star next to it, a private reminder to check in. An hour later, as dusk softened the corners of the room, my phone buzzed. A message from Evan. I think I'm ready to tell you the rest, if you're up for it. I looked at the maple, now a darker shape against a lilac sky, and felt the quiet voice inside me answer. Some moments we enter without knowing how deep they go. Some visits begin with lemon bars and end with a door opening in the heart you didn't know was there. I turned on the porch light, typed back yes, and waited for the knock that would turn a quick visit into something much deeper. I paced a little before he arrived again, not because I was nervous, but because I could feel something shifting in the air long before I heard his footsteps on my porch. The evening light was softer than the day he brought the lemon bars. A gentle orange glow rested on the maple leaves outside and made my living room feel warmer, like the room itself was preparing to listen again. I set out fresh tea, no sugar this time, just in case the quiet needed more space than sweetness. When the knock finally came, it wasn't loud, almost like he was asking permission before he even stepped inside. He walked in slowly, not rushed, not casual. He didn't sit right away. Instead, he stood near the bookshelf that holds my old recipe notebooks, tapping his thumb against his palm like he was rehearsing thoughts that didn't want to line up neatly. I told him there was no need to hurry the words. He nodded, then sat in that same window chair, as if it belonged to him now. For a moment we just listened to the neighborhood sounds, distant cars, someone walking a dog, a mailbox lid closing 2 houses down. That's when he finally took a breath that didn't look borrowed. He told me the rest of the story with quiet bravery. The job he'd been holding onto was beginning to feel like a costume he put on every morning, while the real version of himself waited in the hallway. He admitted he wasn't chasing money as much as he was trying to chase approval from people who barely knew him. He said he feared that changing his path would disappoint his father, and he feared that disappointment more than the possibility of failing at something new. Then he paused, and his voice dropped to a softer register, like he was carrying a fragile object in both hands. He said there was someone in his life, someone he admired deeply, someone he talked to like no one else, someone whose presence made him want to be careful with his own heart and his own choices. He worried this person might think less of him if he made a mistake. He didn't name her at first. He just described how this person made him pay attention to who he truly was inside, not who he was trained to present to the world. I didn't interrupt. I wanted him to find his own pace, his own truth. And then, in a voice that barely crossed the table, he admitted that the person he was speaking about was not someone in his age circle, not someone his friends would expect, but someone who reminded him of wisdom, understanding, and steadiness. Someone who listened to him without judgment. Someone who treated his thoughts like they had value even before they were polished. I felt my heart beat a little heavier then, not in shock, but in recognition of how rare it is for a young man to articulate the deeper layers of connection. He looked directly at me for the first time that evening, his eyes clearer than the first visit. And in that gaze, there was no confusion, no reckless impulse, just a quiet and respectful acknowledgement of the emotional weight he had been carrying. He said he didn't come here to cause discomfort or to complicate my life. He came because he needed someone who understood crossroads to help him interpret his own. I told him something I learned the hard way, that feelings are not obligations. That sometimes connection shows up in unexpected shapes. That honesty is not a demand, it's simply a lantern. He listened without flinching, absorbing every word like they were stepping stones. The room felt both safe and deeply present. Not rushed, not dramatic, just honest. When he left that evening, he thanked me not for answers, but for space. And as he walked down the porch steps, I realized that this wasn't just about his direction. It was also about mine. His vulnerability moved something still tucked away in me, reminding me that even at my age, I am still allowed to discover new meanings in ordinary days. And as the porch light flickered slightly in the cooling air, I knew that this story wasn't finished yet, not for him, and not for me. The next afternoon, I found myself tidying things that didn't need tidying. Straightening books I hadn't touched in months, adjusting the angle of framed photos that were perfectly fine. It wasn't nervousness exactly. It was more a quiet awareness that something rare was unfolding, and I didn't want to rush it or label it too quickly. I brewed mint tea this time, letting the steam rise through the late afternoon sunbeams. I thought about my own turning points, how many times in life I had ignored inner nudges because I feared being misunderstood or judged. His honesty had stirred those memories in me, not painfully, but as a reminder that growth doesn't really stop, no matter our age. He arrived without knocking. He texted first, "I'm outside," as if he wanted to make sure the moment had permission to continue. When I opened the door, he looked lighter. Not carefree, but relieved, like someone had finally placed a stone down after holding it too long. This time he sat comfortably, leaning back into the chair instead of balancing on its edge. The way he spoke felt less like confession and more like conversation. He told me he had spoken to his father the night before. Not a confrontation, not an argument, but a short, truthful acknowledgement that he was reconsidering the route everyone assumed for him. His father didn't respond well, not badly either, just stunned. Sometimes silence is louder than shouting. We talked about how complicated expectations can be, how people sometimes love us in the only way they know how, even if that love comes wrapped in pressure or fear. While we spoke, he leaned forward, elbows on knees, turning the old tape measure slowly between his fingers. We both understood that this object now represented more than measurement. It was a small symbol of choosing to build instead of simply perform. Then his words shifted from his father to the deeper truth he had hinted before. He said the reason this emotional weight felt so heavy was that he was not just making decisions about his career. He was questioning the meaning of connection itself. He admitted that the rare ease he felt speaking with me was something he couldn't clearly define. It wasn't something casual. It wasn't something dramatic. It was something grounded, measured, thoughtful. He said I felt like a mirror that didn't distort him, a place where his thoughts weren't rushed or dismissed. I listened very carefully, because the space between honesty and misunderstanding is thin. I told him that emotional connection can exist in many shapes, that not every deep feeling needs to become something labeled or restricted. Sometimes people arrive in our lives not to stay forever, but to illuminate something essential inside us. He nodded, not wounded by those words, but strengthened. He said he wanted to learn how to make choices based on his own inner voice, not as a reaction to approval or fear. And I saw something gentler in him, something steady. He wasn't running from responsibility. He was learning how to choose responsibility that truly belonged to him. Before he left, we stepped onto the porch and watched the sky shift into a soft peach color. He stood quietly beside me, not needing to fill the moment with words. Then he said something that stayed with me long after the door closed behind him. "You made it safe for me to hear myself." I closed the door and leaned gently against it, letting those words settle. I realized that whatever form this connection took, whether brief or lasting, it had already done something meaningful. It reminded me that influence is not always loud, not always dramatic. Sometimes it is a quiet guiding presence at the exact moment someone needs it. And as evening settled deeper and the porch light glowed warm against the quiet street, I understood that tomorrow might bring another conversation, maybe even a turning point, and that neither of us was simply visiting anymore. We were both learning, in different ways, how to listen to the voice within.